Joyce. Barnaby Joyce, welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, how do you think the coalition started week two? Yesterday we had the campaign launch. Joe Hockey debated Wayne Swan. I know that you've been on an aeroplane, but according to our correspondents in Canberra, the debate was pretty much a dead heat. What's your reading?
Well, the debate really circles around this, that the Labor Party is driving us into debt. They're $153.2 billion in debt. Mr Swan the other day couldn't tell you the interest expense. I will. It's costing you $30 million a day. That's more money than people would ever dream of having in their life, in excess of $200 million a week. It's about $11 billion a year. It'll be about $12 billion next year just in gross interest expense. The Labor Party continued to say that this is not a problem. I think people would say $30 million a day just in interest is a major problem.
Well, if we're going to talk specific numbers on the economy, during today's debate, Joe Hockey did reiterate that the coalition thought the second stimulus package of $42 billion was too big. He said the coalition supported something more like $15 to $20 billion. So if you'd been in government and if you'd had a second stimulus package in that order, how much debt would we have now? Debt under Labor is going to peak at 6% of GDP. Where would debt under a coalition government?
Well, the debt under the coalition government is going to be much lower because, first of all, we wouldn't have...
But where would it be if you'd been in government now?
But the question is, well, it's going to be lower than where it is. Why would it be lower? Because we would have controlled our costs on the building the education revolution. Let's face it, that was a blowout. In some instances, it was 3 and 4 times the cost of what it should have been. When you ask specifically how much would you save it by, well, we'd have to go through each one of those projects and say, well, these are the savings we would have sought from this area. If I just take one, for instance, let's look at Manila, a little town north of Tamworth, $1.806 million for 2 demountable sheds which became classrooms. This is ridiculous. If you looked in that town and said, show me a $1.806 million house, you wouldn't find one. It would be palatial.
Well, what about surplus? If we look forward, Tony Abbott says that the surplus under a coalition government in 2012-2013 will be bigger than the one promised by Labor.
Well,
How much bigger?
Well, let's look at the promises that Labor made. Remember, this year, Labor's got a couple of records because they are an incredible group of people.
But I'm asking you how much bigger a coalition surplus would be than a government surplus.
Well, we've announced that we are going to have 28.6 billion in recurring savings, 22 billion one-off savings, predominantly from the NBN and the sale of Medibank Private. So we can put these into the calculations. The Labor Party are counting as savings a mining tax and the cigarettes tax. So I don't quite know how that works.
But
the Labor Party, who are actually running the show, can't even tell you what their own interest bill is going to be. The Labor Party, who are running the show, we've had a question on notice. They keep on talking about their net debt and their gross debt. Well, their gross debt is going to be about $220 billion. That's money that you'll owe to the Chinese, to the people in the Middle East, to people all around the world.
So that's your view about Labor. What about a coalition government? You've committed to a bigger surplus than what a Labor government will deliver by 2012. How much bigger?
Well, that's a question.
You must know, otherwise you wouldn't be able to say it's going to be bigger.
Well, of course it's going to be. We've told you, we've nominated the savings. I've just nominated them for you there.
But can you give me a figure on the final surplus? I mean, the government has given us a forecast surplus of $3.1 billion by 2012.
Not even not even the Labor Party can keep to their surplus. Remember, this year the year just gone past, they nominated a $17 billion surplus. We ended up with a $57.1 billion deficit. And I want to remind the Australian people that just because you have a surplus doesn't mean you've paid off your debt. If you've got a surplus, you've still got a mighty lot of debt to pay off.
I guess my point is that if you're able to say that you will have a bigger surplus than Labor, then you must have some idea of what the quantum's going to be.
Well, we're quite happy to, and we're submitting all our costings now. I'll have to remind people that as we submit our costings, and we'll have submitted 52 policies, I think we're submitting another 18 today. Labor, by the way, I think have only submitted 25. Then we get a clearer idea from a precise form of exactly where our budget goes. So it is not proper for me to start announcing what the savings will be before Treasury does the proper costings.
But we will get a surplus forecast before the poll.
Well, you're definitely going to get one. And I would suggest to the Australian people that the Labor Party suggesting that they're going to get a surplus, you must look at their record. They predicted last year would have a surplus. We ended up with a $57.1 billion deficit. That means out the back door by $57.1 billion, adding to our debt. And what I can also suggest to the Australian people, that the way the Labor Party will ultimately start bodging up the books is they will jam a new tax on electricity. And we will have a massive tax on electricity, a massive tax as a sort of a consumption-based tax. They'll call it the ETS, they'll call it what you like, but they will think of a broad-based consumption tax to try and prop up the poorest state of the nation's finances.
Let's look at spending on your side, because it was interesting that yesterday, certainly in Tony Abbott's speech, there was no new spending commitments, and everyone knows the bucket's empty. But Warren Truss, your leader, made a number of commitments. He had new scholarships for country students to become doctors, a 4-lane highway from Sale to Colac through Melbourne, Sydney to Brisbane, then north past Gympie, a 4-lane highway between Launceston and Hobart, improve the highway network connecting Perth to the mining communities, and so it goes on. But there was no money mentioned. How is all of that going to be paid for?
Well, just like we've heard that the Labor Party are going to build the Inland Rail. A marvellous announcement, except they said 2035. This is, most people...
They've actually announced a study into whether there's going to be a vibe. He was actually announcing, we will finish these projects. Well, very hard to finish a project when you're not saying how much it's going to cost or how you're going to pay for it.
After AusLink, we have obviously expenditure out in AusLink that's...
enough to cover all of that?
No, we will have to... from 2014 on will be the new AusLink package, and we are looking at there. But you're entitled to start foreshadowing the announcements and the vision you have for the nation. We have the vision to build the 4-lane highway, to complete it, to drive it forward.
But and having the vision and not having the money, they're very different things.
Let's look at one of the other announcements, the Inland Rail. Okay, the Inland Rail actually is, there's a lot of commercial viability already there without much government money at all.
But that wasn't your announcement. I'm more interested in what you've announced, that you're going to build all these highways, these scholarships. Is there the money in your budget to do that?
Well, he has announced that this is going to be part of the foreshadowed process going into the future AusLinks.
And so the answer is no, not at the moment.
There's nothing, well, no more than what Labor's announced. Labor just announced a railway they're going to build in 2035. I mean, how ridiculous is that? They announced that they were going to build a high-speed rail from Brisbane down to Melbourne, and when we drilled through, what they've really announced is a $20 million feasibility study between Newcastle and Sydney. I mean, this is the farcical arrangements of Labor Party announcements. But one thing that we can do, and if the Labor Party were diligent, they would be on their front foot, and rather talking about a 2035 completion of the Inland Rail, they would realise that there are take-and-pay agreements, there are offload agreements, there's the capacity to build the Inland Rail. We've got to be diligent and try and make sure we get standard gauge, and we can do something to create a corridor of commerce, of prosperity for people inland.
Well, let's move away from Inland Rail and onto something that is very close to your heart, and that is water.
Yes.
At yesterday's launch again, Tony Abbott, he talked about water. He said the Murray-Darling Basin Plan will be released for consultation in the first month of a coalition government, which, yes, it will, because that is the timetable laid out. But he also said the coalition will fully and finally implement the Howard-Turnbull-Anderson plan for the Murray-Darling Basin. Now, how does the Howard-Turnbull plan fit with the official Murray-Darling Basin plan under the Water Act, which is due to be released in a month's time?
Well, it was the coalition that put on the table the $10 billion plus to try and remedy the effects of problems in the Murray-Darling Basin. It's the coalition plan that put on the table the capacity for the buyback of water, for the capacity of the replumbing of water. It's the coalition that has actually designated that we should have refurbished, redesigned the Menindee storage lakes, which Minister Wong has failed to do.
But isn't the point that the Howard plan put on the table in 2007, the emphasis was more on, I suppose, infrastructure for better, more efficient irrigation than water buybacks. But now you've got this Murray-Darling Basin plan under the Water Act. Well, are the two one and the same thing? And if not, how do you put them together?
Well, who on earth would know what the Murray-Darling Basin plan is going to be at the moment? Because Minister Wong has failed to release it.
Well, I guess,
but let's clear
well, that's not entirely true, is it? Because the Murray-Darling Basin Authority said that they wouldn't release their plan while the government was in caretaker mode. However, that's not the point. What I wanted to ask you was, how can you, well, not how can you, but what will happen under a coalition government, given that there is a full and final implementation of the Howard-Turnbull plan? I assume that was the plan of 2007. And then you've also got the Murray-Darling plan, which under the Water Act is in the process of being implemented or will be implemented. How will the two sit together?
Well, the problem we've got with the Murray-Darling Basin plan is that Minister Wong hasn't actually released it. And I do not countenance for 1 second this excuse that we're in this hiatus of an election. She had 18 months to get together the committee.
Even if you haven't seen that, he has committed to implementing the Howard-Turnbull plan. So you go ahead with that regardless. Where does the Murray-Darling Basin plan sit beside it? Can they run in tandem?
Well, let's get Minister Wong to release the plan, and we can have this discussion.
But will a coalition government implement the Howard-Turnbull-Anderson plan as put on the table in 2007?
We put the whole Murray-Darling plan to refurbish, to replumb, to buy back, to try and bring some resolve, to get more water down to Adelaide, to deal with the issues, and it's been an arduous task, but we started it. We just relied on Minister Wong to release the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. She has failed to do that. She's blaming someone else. She's blaming the committee she's set up. In fact, she took 18 months to set up.
We're going to run out of time. I just wanted a straight answer from you. Regardless of what happens with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, will the Howard, Turnbull, Anderson plan, the Murray-Darling Basin, and that's how it was described by Tony Abbott, it will be fully and finally implemented? Well, that will happen regardless of what the Murray-Darling Basin Plan says?
Well, how can we determine what's in the Murray-Darling Basin Plan when it hasn't been released? You're asking me about a hypothetical, about a plan
but it's not a hypothetical.
that hasn't been released.
Yes, but what I'm asking, the plan that hasn't been released is still a plan that is there under legislation to be enforced, whatever it is. And Tony Abbott is also saying that he will put in place the Howard Turnbull plan. I'm just wondering how the two are going to coexist. Well, whatever is in the Murray-Darling Basin plan.
What happens if the Murray-Darling Basin plan says do nothing? What are we going to do then?
Well, I don't know. Do you repeal the Water Act?
Well, how do we know? I mean, this is how ludicrous Senator Wong's position has got us. We've got no idea what's in her plan, and she's using the fact that she's been indulgent and has lacked the capacity to release her own plan, and now she's hiding behind her own inadequacies.
What happens if it is very different to the Howard Turnbull Anderson plan? What happens then?
Well, it's a good question for Minister Wong. Get her to release a plan and we can have a debate. She keeps on wanting a debate, but how can we possibly have a debate about a report she's never released?
Barnaby Joyce, I thank you greatly for coming in, and I heard you yesterday say how many places that you've been visiting and the fact that you're desperately in need of some sleep. But thank you so much for making the time to join us.
My pleasure. Thanks.